Hey everybody, Jeff Schneider here, and today we're going to learn how to work licks into your solos. We're going to start with a simple lick. This is on a B flat 7 chord, and it goes like this. Not too difficult. I'll write out the notes: D, F, A flat, C, G, and F. Now, the thing is, this system, this method, whatever you want to call it, you can apply it to any lick you learn. The end game here is to be able to weave the licks that you're learning into your solos and have them sound natural, because there's nothing worse than working on your vocabulary and learning all of these licks, but then whenever you try to actually put them into a solo, it just sounds forced and inorganic. So we don't want that. We want to have that flowy, natural sound. So the first step, obviously, you need to learn the lick, but you really want to understand it as well. And the first step to doing that is a quick analysis. So we have this B flat 7 here. If we were to think of these note names as numbers, well, the D is the third, the F is the fifth, the A flat is the flat 7, the C is the 9, the G is the 6, and the F there, again, is the 5. So we have 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 6, 5. We have this arpeggio. We can look for these patterns, right? So we have an arpeggio going up from the 3 to the 9. And then we've got this 6, 5 at the end. And something else that I've done here, in addition to looking for scale patterns and arpeggios, I've broken up the lick into two parts. You don't have to do that, but it can be really helpful to, especially on longer licks, break them up into smaller parts and learn those parts individually, and then you can put the puzzle together and it will feel like you have a much better handle on things rather than that feeling like you're holding on for dear life to get through the whole lick. So this is a shorter lick, but we can still break it up. We have this arpeggio going up from the 3 to the 9, and then going down 6, 5 with the chord. Okay, so we have a deeper analysis. That's step 1, and we've broken it up to make it more manageable. Now, it's going to be a lot easier to go to step 2, and that is to play it in other keys, to transpose it. Now, ideally, you transpose it into all 12 keys, and you can do that a number of ways. You can go up half steps, whole steps, you can go around the circle of fifths, you can go up and down minor thirds, and I'll do it really slow to start. And I'll talk through it because that can be really helpful, again, to just reinforce the analysis that we just did. So in B flat 7, now let's go up a fourth. B flat 7 to E flat 7. And we'll do a few different chords here. So up a fourth from E flat 7 is A flat 7. And we'll do one more. We'll go to D flat 7. So B flat 7, 3 up to the 9, and then our 6, 5. Now we're going to E flat 7. What's the third of E flat 7? It's a G. So we're going to go up from the 3 to the 9. So 3, 5, flat 7, 9, and then 6, 5. By the way, if you want to download these chord scale charts, you can get them for free, linked in the description below. They are a great resource for understanding how your chords and scales work together for improvising and building chords. Let's do it on A flat 7. Start on the third and arpeggiate up. By the way, if it's helpful, you can think of this 9 as a 2. Arpeggiate up, and then part 2 of the lick is 6, 5. Finally, D flat 7, 3, 5, 7, 9, 6, 5. Let's just do another example just so you can hear what that sounds like. Let's do up minor thirds now. That's kind of a cool sound. B flat 7, up a minor third is D flat 7. Up a minor third from there is E7. And then up a minor third from E is G7. Let's work through it the same way. We know our B flat 7. Now D flat 7, starting on the third. Let's do E7. What's the third of E7? It's G sharp. So we're going to go 3, 5, 7, 9, 6, 5, and then G7. All right, so a couple of different ways of transposing. The goal is to not need to think about it. Now, the way to get there is by using a metronome, because what the metronome does is it keeps the pressure on. If we play the D flat 7 and then I think about it, okay, we got the third, and then we got 5. What's the 5? A flat, and then this flat 7 is C flat, and then, okay, so yeah, I'm working it out really slow, and that's fine at the beginning, but you want your end game to be where you can just go through it without any thinking. Even if that means starting slow, like this is 72 beats per minute. And we're gonna go up minor thirds, starting on B flat 7. Sounds like this, 3, 4. And then you can wait, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I do it like that, I'm giving myself plenty of time in between chords to be thinking ahead. And as soon as I finish one chord and I'm holding it out, I'm thinking, okay, what chord is next? What's my first note gonna be? Okay, it's a D flat 7, I gotta play the third, so it's an F, and then I'm off to the races. Now, to make it more challenging, sure, you can speed up the tempo, but you can also reduce the amount of time between chords. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, instead of giving myself basically a whole measure, we can do it something like this. So obviously, there's less time. I'm not playing that fast, I'm thinking fast so that I can get to that next key as seamlessly as possible. And if you find yourself making mistakes and you're fumbling, you can slow down the tempo or you can give yourself more time to think. That's what I always like to tell my students. If something is too hard, you need to give yourself more time to think and or less to think about. So what that means is if you need more time to think, you can slow down the tempo, like I said, or you can give yourself more time between keys, or give yourself less to think about. And in that case, maybe you only work on part 1 of the lick, that arpeggio. You just work on that, and then you go to E flat and then A flat. That's giving yourself less to think about. So remember those two things. Give yourself more time to think or less to think about. And if you need to make it more challenging, you do the opposite. You give yourself less time to think and more to think about. But you don't have to do both. You can do one or the other. Get creative with it. The most important thing is that you're calibrating the difficulty so that it's a challenge, but it's not overwhelming. Because if you're just making mistakes the whole time, you're not going to be getting any better. You're just going to be practicing mistakes. So calibrate that difficulty. Super duper important. This is level 1 or step 1, really. This is mastering the lick, transposing it into other keys. Now, this is a very methodical way of doing it, but you can also start to work on transposing the lick into other keys in a more musical way, like on an actual tune. So we're going to take this lick and I'm going to put it over a B flat blues, a simple one. So this is a standard 1-4-5 blues progression. We'll make it more complex as we go, but I want to start out with something fairly simple. And this is what it's going to sound like. We're just going to play the lick in as many places as possible. Fortunately, this is a blues, so all of the chords are dominant 7 chords, so we can actually play our lick on every single chord. Actually, before I put on the backing track, let's just make sure I can play this lick on all 3 of these chords. We have B flat 7, E flat 7, and F7. All right, let's hear what it sounds like with the backing track. All right, thinking ahead the whole time. B flat 7. Okay, here comes E flat 7. Back to B flat 7. Okay, F7 coming up. Here's the turnaround. E flat 7. B flat 7. And then quick F7. At the end there's a lot of chords. We have 4 chords in a row. So that might be a good opportunity to give yourself less to think about, meaning only work on those 4 measures. Going through it, first without the tempo. Okay, I've kind of got it now without the tempo. Now, most backing track apps, I mean, if you don't have to use a backing track app, you can use a metronome, it's fine too. If you're using a backing track app like I am, oftentimes you can just loop certain sections by highlighting them. So here's just the last 4 measures. This is just the turnaround. So starting on F7, 1, 2, 3, 4. start again with F7. Again, I'm just isolating that problem spot until I feel comfortable with it, and then I can bring it back into the rest of the form. But we started with this simple 1-4-5 blues progression. Once you feel comfortable with that, you can start to use more complex chord progressions. We can actually stick with this blues progression. I'm just going to add some more chords to it to make it a little bit more challenging. So let's put an E flat 7 here, and then we'll go back to B flat 7. And then I'll actually do E7 here, sort of a tritone substitution to get us to the E flat 7 there. And then, let's see, I don't want to make it too complicated right off the bat. We're going to grow this gradually. So we'll put the G7 right here. And then we'll make it more of a jazz blues. We'll go C7. We'll do sort of this, sort of like a 2-5-1. There's F7. Let's make sure I can play the lick for all of these chords. We have the B flat 7, of course, then the E flat 7. All right, there's an E7 in there, which gets us to E flat 7. What else is new? The G7. And again, it's just 3, 5, 7, 9, and then the 6, 5. I know this lick pretty well, so I don't have to think about it too much. But if you're just learning it for the first time, talk it out loud. Okay, we have a C7 there. What's the third? It's an E. We're going to go 3, 5, 7, 9, and then 6, 5. And then F7, and then the rest is history. We know the rest of these chords. Let's hear what it sounds like with the backing track. All right, thinking ahead. B flat 7. G7, C7, and then back at B flat 7. Okay, that's sounding pretty cool. We can make it even more complicated. Let's add some more chords in here. We'll take out this E flat 7 and we'll do a B7. Let's add an A flat 7 in here. Let's do this. This will be really challenging. We'll do like a couple of chords per measure here. Put a G7 in there, a C7, and an F7. So when we have 2 chords per measure, like we have in here, we're going to need to do the lick twice as fast. So it's going to be like this. And then we're back. Okay, let's make sure I can play it on that B7. 3, 5, 7, 9, 6, 5. A flat 7, that was a new chord, I think. All right, so there's a lot of thinking ahead here. Remember, it's not just about the lick. It's being able to switch gears, thinking in new keys so that you can play that lick whenever, wherever you want. Let's try it out. I'm going to think ahead as much as possible. B flat 7. Right, I made it through. It's a very cerebral exercise. We're not doing too much ear training here, though hearing the lick in all of these different contexts and chord progressions is actually a good way of better internalizing the sound of it. But what I'm focusing on is a very cerebral part of learning. It's making sure I understand the lick on a deep level. We broke it up into different parts, and now I'm applying it in all of these different ways. I'm essentially just transposing the lick like I was before, but instead of it going around the circle of fourths or up minor thirds or whatever, I'm doing the same thing but in a more practical context. But the thing is, it still sounds like an exercise, and that brings us to the next step, and that is to start integrating the lick into a more flowy application, context, really. So let's get rid of all of these crazy chords. We're going to go back to our basic blues progression so that we don't have to worry about too much at once here. Now the trick here, again, is to make this lick feel like it's natural, like it's supposed to be in the greater solo. You don't want your licks to sound forced. because that's just like an obvious lick. That's why licks can get a bad rap, because a lot of the time it just sounds like they're plopped into the middle of a solo and they don't make any sense in the context of whatever else you're playing. So to make a lick sound more natural, what we want to do is practice what I call on-ramps and off-ramps. So an on-ramp is how you get into the lick, and an off-ramp is how you get out of it, how you exit the lick. So before I even use the backing track or this chord progression, let's just focus on B flat 7. Let's play the lick again. Okay, let's start with on-ramps. Now, another way to think about on-ramps is just a pickup into the lick. So the lick starts on a D, starts on the third, so that's kind of like our target note. So we can do any number of pickup notes to get there, but the easiest way to start is just with one pickup note. And one that works all the time is just starting a half step below whatever that first note of the lick is. So we're starting on a D, a half step below D is D flat. So we're going to come in on the and of 4. It's going to sound like this. A 1, 2, 3, 4. Easy. You can do this starting on any note that's a half step below the first note of your actual lick. So if you're starting on a D, you start on a D flat. It's a pickup though. It's not starting on beat 1. The actual lick is exactly the same as it was before. We're starting the lick on beat 1. The pickup note, the on-ramp, is on the half beat before the D. It's the and of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. All right, let's make a slightly longer on-ramp now. Let's do a couple of notes before our D. Let's do a whole step below and climb up chromatically until we get to the D. So it's going to sound like this. A 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2. With the chord, a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. Or how about this? Maybe we start a half step above, a half step below, and then we land on our target note. This is a classic enclosure. What I mean by a half step above is if our target note is D, I'm starting a half step above, which is E flat. A half step below the target note is D flat, and then we hit our target note. Again, this is going to start on beat 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. So we did a 1-note pickup, a 2-note pickup, a variation. Let's do a 3-note pickup. Let's just start a minor third below and go chromatic up. 1, 2, 3. Or start a minor third above and go chromatically down. You can experiment with these different approach note sequences. That's another way that I refer to these on-ramps is we're approaching a target note, so this becomes an approach note sequence. And there's lots of different variations. You don't have to even do these chromatic approach notes. You can jump around. Maybe you do like so I'm starting on the root essentially, and then I'm going up to the 5, and then down the scale until I get to my third. You also don't have to do eighth notes. You could do something like this. So that was like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3. Those are quarter notes. Lots of, infinite variations, really. The point is, you want to get into the habit of entering into the lick rather than just starting right on it. And that will make it sound a lot more flowy. Now, how do you get out of the lick? Well, those are your off ramps. Again, lots of different ways of doing this. I like to just recommend people use their ear as much as possible. So now I'm going to start right on the lick, no on ramp for now. We're just going to focus on the off ramp. And I'm going to come up with a whole bunch of different ways of playing out of this lick. So, very simple to start. Nothing special there. Let's do another one. Totally fine. Let's do another one. That one again. Or maybe again. Just try coming up with variations. They might not all sound good. That's fine. You just want to get into the habit of exiting the lick. How do you exit out of this lick without it just being this hard stop? Because again, a forced lick is one that has no entrance and no exit. So now let's do both. Let's do an on-ramp and some kind of an off-ramp. Here we go. Cool. Already it's sounding so much more contextual, like there's actually some music there rather than me just plopping this lick in the middle of a solo. Here's another variation. Cool. Let's try that one again. I'm playing my enclosure here. This is an approach note sequence, this on-ramp. I'm starting a half step above my target note. Again, my target note is D, so I'm starting on an E flat, and then going chromatic up from a whole step below my target, landing on D there. Play the lick, and then I played this afterwards. So that's the root of the chord, chromatic down to the flat 7, root, 9, 4, 6, 5. So actually a pattern here is I'm ending the off ramp the same way I ended the lick. The lick ends like this, and my off ramp ended like this. So once you start to learn more licks, you can start to string them together, essentially thinking of lick number 2 as your off ramp. And that's how you get these long flowing lines that just sound like jazz. Speaking of which, licks are a great way of conveying a genre or style of music. So these licks that I'm playing here are very classic jazz oriented licks, but if you want to have a bluesier sound, you can do this same approach with blues licks or with more modern jazz licks. So I think about licks as the icing on the cake. It's what gives your solo style. If you want to make your solo sound jazzy, you play jazzy licks, bluesy, you play bluesy licks, and so on. But what's underneath the icing? Well, that's your cake. And in the musical context, cake is your melodic material. It's like your ideas that relate to one another. And the lick is kind of like the thing that you can put between your melodic ideas to add a little bit of style. So rather than me just telling you about it, let me show you what I'm talking about here. So let's use B flat 7 again, and I'm going to play this melodic idea. Nice. Now I'm going to play the lick. And then I'm going to play something after the lick that relates to the thing I played before the lick. I call this rapping, lick rapping. So my first idea was this. Then my lick. And then maybe something like. Now this relates to. Here's what it sounds like all together. So you can hear how the beginning of that idea relates to the end of the idea, and the lick is in there in between the two, but it all feels very natural because of that container, because of the relationship between the first idea and the idea at the end. Those two melodic ideas relate to one another, and then the lick in between adds a little bit of style. One more time. When we add some more on-ramps and off-ramps to the lick, it sounds even more natural. Check this out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, the first idea, very melodic. Then I played an on-ramp. That approach note sequence targeting the D. Then the lick. And then my off ramp, something like to that idea at the end, which is connected to the idea at the beginning. So let's do a quick recap here. The first step is to understand the lick. And that means to analyze it, to break it up into chunks so that it's easier to understand. And then what you can do is transpose the lick. You can do that in a very methodical way where you're going up minor thirds or around the circle of fifths or just going up half steps or down half steps. All of those are fine. But I also recommend using a chord progression that you're familiar with, like a blues or a standard, any progression that you know well, and putting that lick in as many different places as possible where it makes sense. So that's essentially all transposing the lick. And then step 3 was, let's just call it integration. You're integrating the lick into a greater line by using on-ramps and off-ramps. And then eventually you can start to wrap the licks with more melodic material so that it's not just this random line that you're playing, but it actually supports a more substantial solo that contains melodic material. But if you want to learn more licks in various styles, I have this great series called the Sick Licks series, and it includes licks organized by genre. So I've got a classic jazz series, I've got a blues series, a modern jazz series, and I even break them up by level. So if you are more of a beginner, you can do level 1, and those licks still sound great, even though they're easier to play. And if you want something more advanced, I've got level 2 for all 3 of those styles as well. So check out those licks linked in the description below. And if you want to see another video that talks about how to improve your solos, you can check this one out right over here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.